Hello, it's John Heaton, and this afternoon I'm going to review this album from the Beatles. Just to say that yesterday I did manage to pick up the vinyl version of the Hollywood Bowl concert, but I thought I'd wait before reviewing that until I've actually given it a couple of spins, loud preferably, and then I'll give you my feedback on that. But pretty excited to have that being the first new Beatles release since Let It Be Naked, I suppose, if you exclude compilations and stuff. This was a wonderful addition to the catalogue when it came out in 1994, and beautiful to have it on vinyl. It's also available on CD. This is the newer version of the CD, which came out a couple of years ago, Volume 1, and then we were lucky a couple of years ago to have Volume 2, which unearthed even more treasures from the BBC archives. And what is clear from both of these volumes is they were very well recorded, and for the most part live, the equivalent of live studio recordings. No audience as such, or in a few cases there was a small audience, but in most cases just the four of them sitting in the studio at the BBC recording a whole treasure trove of songs, from originals to covers, and with only Brian Matthews and whoever was in control of the presentation side of things, as a couple of engineers maybe, but not as sophisticated a recording setup as EMI, but having said that, very well recorded. And John Lennon said that in the Andy Peebles interview, 6th December 1980, that he started off by talking about the BBC sessions and said, you know, he didn't know what had happened to the tapes, and he thought maybe Bernie Andrews had bootlegged them. Well, they had been bootlegged, John was right, but luckily the tapes survived. And then when after Lennon passed away, Andy Peebles, I think, dug into it, and about 18 months later the BBC presented a show called The Beatles at the Beeb on Radio 1, which was basically a world premiere of a lot of the songs which were later to be on this album. And it was just staggering, the quantity and the quality of the songs. So, what is it, 12 years later, the album came out officially. Of course, we'd all taped it off the radio, or those of you who didn't have access to the BBC had probably bought bootlegs of it. But even so, very nice to have it as an official release. So this nice packaging of the vinyl, with some sleeve notes here from, is it Kevin Howlett? Yeah. Some nice pictures. And then the inner sleeves give you the track details and some pictures. In slightly more legible format than on the small CD. And what's very nice about these releases is it's on Apple. So, which hadn't been the case with any Beatles releases really since the Red and Blue album from 1973. So about 20 years without seeing the Apple label, other than on the original Beatle albums from 68 onwards. Although I did manage to pick up a copy of Rock and Roll Music, an Indian pressing, which was on Apple, which was interesting. So the other disc, again, similar, some pictures, and again on the Apple. And I saw that the Hollywood Bowl album, which has just come out, is not on Apple, which is a little bit disappointing. I don't know what determines whether they put stuff on Apple or what label they put it on, Parlophone or something, because obviously Apple had not been formed when they recorded these sessions. But personally speaking, I like to have it on Apple. So when this album came out, it got to number 3 in the US, number 1 in the UK. Very generous in its length. It's a long double album, shall we say, a very long double album. In fact, they could have even made it into a triple. These days they probably would make it into a triple if they were releasing it on vinyl. And it's not all music. It's the chats in between the songs, very charming chats between the boys and the presenter, and particularly the one at the beginning, the riding on a bus, where Paul and George remark about what it's like being a famous person riding on a bus or going to a restaurant, and some quite perceptive comments from the young lads during this BBC session. One could read too much into it. I don't know. They were enjoying fame at the time, I think, but later on it became a bit of a curse, I think, particularly to George. But I'll just say, this album has a lot of Lennon-McCartney stuff on the second disc, because by the time they reach 64, and these sessions go up to 65, I think, or mainly 63, 64. But by the time they got to 64, they were doing mainly their own originals. But the first disc is probably the most interesting, because there's a lot of cover songs which do not appear on any Beatles album, and they're easily on a par with the cover songs which were released on Please Please Me, with the Beatles, Beatles for Sale and Help. Just mention a few. I've Got a Woman is a Ray Charles song, and also Elvis did it, which John tackles in very confident style, and it's a winner. Too Much Monkey Business is another Chuck Berry number. Sorry, a Chuck Berry number. There are more to come later. And it's sung brilliantly by John, and in fact there's an amusing moment in the 1980 Playboy interviews when he was saying he doesn't subscribe to Darwin's theory about monkeys turning into men. And he's saying, well, why are monkeys not turning into men now? And then he, as a little aside, he says, "Too much monkey business." Chuckles to himself. So that's a very... I haven't heard the audio, but that's in print. You can read that. And then Keep Your Hands Off My Baby is not particularly good quality, but a very nice session. And there were a few others of similar quality which were left out, but they kept this one on, and glad they did. It's a Goffin and King number. And then probably the biggest rarity on here is a Lennon-McCartney original, I'll Be On My Way, which they gave away and never recorded for themselves. But the sun is fading away, it's the end of the day. As the June light turns to moonlight, I'll be on my way. So, as you can see, lyrically it's nothing special, but it's a very nice tune, and it's got the hallmark of the Beatles' early work written all over it. And they could have easily put this on one of the early albums. And as it is, it's very nice to have it here. Youngblood, sung by George, not quite so successful, this one. It's a Lieber Stoller number. Quite amusing interjections from John, You're the One. And then the highlight, or one of the highlights of the entire album, A Shot of Rhythm and Blues from Arthur Alexander, tackled brilliantly by John. And he was to do, this session for that song was sometime in 63. And so he'd already, around the same time, recorded Anna from Arthur Alexander for the Please Please Me album. And there's another song called Soldier of Love, featured in the 63 BBC session from Arthur Alexander as well. And both of those songs, along with Anna, which is already a classic, both of those songs could have fitted easily onto with the Beatles, and probably should have done, in my opinion, at the expense of maybe, I don't know, Ronald the Beethoven or something. Just my opinion. Sure to Fall, Cole Perkins number, tackled by McCartney on lead vocal here. Ringo was to return to this and do a good version of his Stop and Smell the Roses album with Paul on bass and backing vocals. This version here is a little bit workmanlike, it's okay. Spirited version of Some Other Guy, which they performed at the Cavern as well. Lieber Stoller number. Carol, another Chuck Berry classic. There's a little poem sent in from the Form Upper Third at Hemel Hempstead, which is where my sister and her family live to this day. Now, or not then, but for the last few years. And some girl had written to George, John, Ringo, Paul, here's hoping that you please us all. A beaty song with swinging voice. We'll leave it up to you, the choice. We think you're fab and really cool, so brighten up our lives at school. So here's Paul whistling Clarabella, says John. So John, he'd read out the poem and he introduces Clarabella, which is it's quite an obscure song. I'm not sure who wrote this one, but Paul tackles it very confidently. And then, I mean, it's just song after song of brilliance. I'm going to sit right down and cry over you. Again, quite an obscure song. I don't think it was a huge hit for anyone. Maybe Elvis covered this one. But Ringo's drumming is just brilliant, considering it's virtually live in the studio. Crying, Waiting, Hoping from Buddy Holly. Great backing vocals. And it's a little bit strange, in my opinion, that they didn't include more Buddy Holly on their early records, because he was one of their all-time heroes without question. And then Lennon would obviously return to Buddy Holly on the rock and roll album with Peggy Sue and McCartney as well on his rock and roll albums. And you've got an amusing bit of Lennon humour in Dear Whack, which is nice to hear. I like the way this album is sequenced, mostly music, but you've got the interspersed dialogue in the middle. You've really got a Hold on Me, which was included on with the Beatles. Very good version on here, effortlessly performed. They obviously knew this one backwards. To Know Her Is to Love Her. Great version of that. Backing vocals to Die For, and this is a song written by Phil Spector, who was later to cross paths with them, as we know, and would produce Let It Be and Imagine, Plastic Ono Band, All Things Must Pass. But this was much earlier on, when Spector was working with his Wall of Sound girl groups and stuff. The Honeymoon Song from 1959, sung beautifully by Paul. And Mary Hopkin was to cover this on her Postcard album with Paul producing. It's a lovely song. I adore it, and I think they probably could have had this one either instead of Till There Was You or as well as Till There Was You. Maybe not two songs on with the Beatles in the same genre, but it's in that kind of style. But I think it's better than Till There Was You, in my opinion. But maybe that's because it was a novelty. It certainly was a novelty when we first heard it. Then you've got Johnny B. Good, Chuck Berry, performed well, Memphis, Tennessee. Chuck Berry again performed excellently. John on vocal. John is taking the vocals on most of these, but not all of them. Paul's on a few and George is on a few. But I think John's work the best. Memphis, Tennessee, just checking. Yeah, it is Chuck Berry, of course. Lucille, not written by Little Richard, but I think made famous by Little Richard, yeah. Again, not recorded officially by the Beatles, and not performed by them live, to my knowledge, up until Wings' first tour of '72. And then they also did this song in '79. So it's okay, it's not my favourite. Sweet Little 16, the old Chuck Berry classic. I think the Chuck Berry songs on here, on this album, are actually better than Roll Over Beethoven, which was the one they chose with the Beatles. But again, that's just personal taste. Lonesome Tears in My Eyes, another sort of slower number tackled by John. And then it's just ridiculous how many songs there are on this album. I mean, if you include all the dialogue, it's 34 on the first disc and 35 on the second. Nothing Shaking Like the Leaves on the Tree is tackled by George on vocal. It's okay. It rocks along nicely. It's not a highlight. Hippie Hippie Shake. Where did this one come from? Suddenly you've got Paul belting, for goodness sake, I got the hippie hippie shake. Bit similar to Long Tall Sally in terms of his vocal, and just whatever you want to call it, a lost masterpiece which was discovered on. It's not a masterpiece, but it's very nice to hear. Glad All Over, I think, is the Carl Perkins number again, but it's tackled by George on vocal, and it's okay, nothing to write home about. Can't find it at the moment, it's loud all over. Okay. I Just Don't Understand, a nice waltz number from John. Ooh My Soul, again, a bit like Hippie Hippie Shake or Long Tall Sally, that type of vocal from Paul. And I think this one was made famous by Little Richard. Don't You Ever Change, another nice song from John, sung by John. And then Lend Me Your Comb was not featured on the album when it first came out for some reason. I think it was included as a bonus track on one of the singles or something. But it did actually make its way on to be released when the reissues came out. I can't remember if it was in Volume 1 or Volume 2, but this Volume 2 came out, as I say, was it 2013, I think, yeah. And not quite as memorable, because a lot of the songs are repeated from the first volume. It's just alternate takes, which is very nice to hear, don't get me wrong. And you've got songs which feature on here which were not on the first volume, such as If I Fell from Hard Day's Night, and I Love Her. So a really important addition to the Beatles catalogue, probably their most important release since the breakup in terms of group material, in my opinion. 5 star, 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching. See you next time.